biological sex a protected characteristic and return gender recognition responsibilities to central government away from the devolved administrations. Well, I'm joined now by Helen Joyce, Director of Advocacy at the human rights charity Sex Matters. Helen, Joyce, good to talk to you today. What do you make of the announcement that Kemi Badenoch made this morning?
Well, we've been calling for it for 2 years now, and we had a petition which got more than 110,000 signatures and was debated in Westminster Hall last year, almost exactly a year ago. And more than a dozen MPs spoke at that from different parties. It's needed because the Equality Act is a sort of wrap-up act that takes into it lots of different bits of anti-discrimination law, one of them being the Sex Discrimination Act, which is about 50 years old now. But since that was passed, when obviously sex meant sex, there wasn't any other meaning of it, we've had the Gender Recognition Act, which treats a few people, about less than 10,000 so far, as for some legal purposes being members of the opposite sex. And when the Equality Act was passed, nobody stopped and thought, well, what does that mean for this piece of paper that you can get saying that a man is a woman for the purposes of marriage, a new birth cert, a new death cert? Does it mean, for example, when you are considering discrimination at work or harassment, does that man count as a woman for that purpose, or does he remain a man? And we think the law can't work unless sex means sex in the Equality Act. And that doesn't mean not protecting trans people, because there's a separate protected characteristic of gender reassignment, which already protects all trans people from discrimination and harassment and so on, even if they don't have a gender recognition certificate.
Do you think the problem is the actual Equalities Act itself or the interpretation of it?
Yes, I think you touch a good point there. I don't think anyone thought at the time that the Equality Act was passed that sex could mean anything but sex, because this is really a discourse that's come about since then, really, I would say in the last 10 years and mostly in the last 5. I think it's more about clarifying it, because the Gender Recognition Act has some legal effects and some other places where it doesn't hold. And that was all said in the Gender Recognition Act. But of course, it was silent on the Equality Act because that was a law that came afterwards. So now we do need to clarify it. I would say it isn't really a change. I would say that it's saying that that was what was intended. And the reason we need to do this is that this issue is coming up in the courts. People are turning up in court, most notably a grassroots group for Women Scotland has a challenge that is going to be in the Supreme Court later this year. And it's not courts that should be answering these questions. It's the legislature. Lawmakers need to show leadership and, tease these matters out properly in Parliament and come up with a solution that works for everybody.
Do you think the government has been slow to act on this? There has been an awareness that this has been an issue, as you say, for a growing awareness for quite a while. Is it coincidental that suddenly they are announcing they're going to do something about this just a few weeks out of an election when a large number of women are going to be voting?
It's a sad fact about women's rights that people tend to think they're a fringe issue. And this one in particular, people tend to think that it's about trans people, which is, of course, an important question. How do you make sure that trans people are included properly in society? But they're a small number, and women are actually the majority of all human beings. But our rights are very easy to write off as a minority or a fringe issue. I've heard people today calling this a culture war, a distraction. I'm not sure what it's a distraction from. The question of how women can move safely in the world, have safety, dignity, privacy and fairness in sports doesn't seem to me to be a fringe issue. So people have been very slow to pick this up as a proper issue because to men it doesn't look like a proper issue. Men don't have skin in the game here. I think that's the big reason, to be honest. And I do hope whoever forms the next government, whether that's the Conservatives or Labour, understand that this is an issue that a lot of women care about. It's on the Mumsnet manifesto. I would call that the biggest doorstep in the country. If it's on the Mumsnet manifesto and we've launched our Stand Up for Single Sex Services campaign today, then this is something that the next Parliament really needs to handle, no matter who's in government.
And do you have concerns, if it is the Labour government that comes into power next, that they won't look at the Equality Act and look at changing it? Both Labour and the Liberal Democrats today have said that they don't see anything wrong with the Act, that it doesn't need altering.
Well, I work for a human rights charity, so I can't say anything that could possibly stray onto any sort of electoral territory. All I can say is that this is an issue that some people in every party understand is a real issue. They've spoken about it in public or sometimes only in private. It's been very hard to speak about it in the past few years. If you look at the way J.K. Rowling has been treated, simply for saying, treat trans people with respect and dignity, but don't forget that biological sex is real. And if you forget that, by the way, women will be harmed. It is, of course, very difficult for somebody to talk about it in public. We hope that in the next Parliament, politicians right across the House will pick this up, will stop leaving it for other people to sort out. It's the classic someone else's problem, and actually show leadership. So I really say, don't write this off as a cultural war issue. Understand that it actually matters to women and girls, but also to men. Men don't want women in spaces where there are urinals. And stop treating it like it's some sort of frivolous matter compared with the real things that men do.
Helen Joyce from Sex Matters, good to talk to you today. Thank you for joining us.